Good morning. This is Saturday, October the 18th, 2014, and we'll be interviewing Walter Anderson, former state of Maine geologist. Good morning, Walter.
Good morning.
Would you state your name and your position in state government in a little detail for us?
Yes, Walter Anderson. I was the director and state geologist of the Maine Geological Survey, the Department of Conservation.
And how long did you work at the Department of Conservation?
I was with the department about 17 years, but a total of about 27 years in state government.
Since a lot of folks don't know exactly what a state geologist does, what were the sort of duties that you were involved in or responsible for?
Yeah, we had a number of programs having to do with, we had a geologic mapping program. We mapped the bedrock as well as the glacial deposits statewide systematically. And we had a groundwater program where we went out and mapped aquifers, bedrock and superficial sand and gravel aquifers. We had a coastal program where we were mapping and documenting coastal processes on the state of Maine in a systematic way. Coastal erosion was a problem at that time, and there were issues on the coast. And we had a seismic program, earthquake monitoring program, in connection with the Western Geophysical Observatory, Boston College, here in Maine, and then also we had a mineral program. Mineral evaluation program for the state of Maine.
So it sounds like that you had areas that had a lot of impact with other state agencies, yes. Effect on the economy and on
yes.
issues that benefited people throughout the state. So it's pretty widespread reach that you had involvement with.
It was economic as well as environmental.
Yeah. Was this the first job you had, or did you come to state government from other positions?
I came to Maine in 1968 from Houston, Texas. I was a geologist involved with a major oil company, involved in onshore and offshore exploration and drilling.
Were they looking for oil in Maine?
Well, it's a time when Ken Curtis was governor, and they were at the time there was a lot of talk about building a refinery somewhere on the coast of Maine, and somehow or other I got involved in that.
During the Brennan administration, the federal government was seeking to build a repository for high-level nuclear waste, and Maine was one of a relatively small number of places that were on a list of possible candidates for a nuclear waste dump. What was your involvement with that issue?
Well, there was the national. It was in 1982, where I think it was the Congress directed the Department of Energy to develop a program to deal with high-level nuclear waste, and the outgrowth of that was the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, and the idea that Congress had in mind there'd be two repositories to deposit high-level nuclear waste, one in the east and one in the west, but they had to go through a rather extensive screening program to do that, and of course, and that was a nationwide screening studies supposedly, and of course Maine was involved in that as along with the other states, and so it wasn't until 1986 that they announced the potential sites for a high-level nuclear waste repository, and Maine was one of the states involved. There were 17 states that were selected, I believe, and Maine was selected, and they selected two granite bodies, the Sebago Lake granite and the Bottle Lake granite up in Washington County. Governor Brennan, I was asked to visit some of his people in his office. So I think it was Kirk Studstrup and Dave Flanagan. I don't think, Nancy, you were there yet, but and they kind of vetted me on this. The governor wanted to put together. Took this seriously. Yeah, when they announced that Maine was one of the candidate sites, and he took it seriously, and he put together a team. He wanted to put together a team that could look at this thing from both the political and the science side of it, because there was a lot of science involved in it, but also a lot of politics.
Yeah, far too much.
All too much. And at the time, so it was determined that I would be part of that team, the state geologist. I had a number of very experienced people in my agency, one of whom was a geochemist who would be familiar with things nuclear, radionuclides and that sort of thing. His name was Mark Loisel. And then the governor, on the governor's political side, it was Nancy Brenneman. And so we kind of made the team, the three of us. Although we had plenty of backup back in the office to verify a lot of things that DOE was up to. But that was essentially the governor's team, and he made it clear. I mean, when the DOE team came to Maine, or came to New England, I mean, the other New England states wouldn't even let them in. They let them in the front door. They wouldn't talk to him. Governor Brennan said, "Yeah, I'm going to talk to him. I mean, after all, this is something that Congress had done." And so he did talk to him, but he had put this team together, and he said to me, I remember he said to me one time, and I know this is something that's been said by others, but he said good science is good policy. He said, I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah.
And he stuck. And I was amazed, because I've heard people say that before, and it's usually something else that prevails. But he stuck with the science part of it, and dealt with the political part of it too. And but he said, remember he told me he wanted to know every move they made. He didn't want to ignore them. He wanted us right in their hip pocket. Yeah. And he wanted to know what they were up to, how they're going to design this thing, whether they're going to do it scientifically in a credible way. And he was very clear on that. Anyway, that was essentially our team, and that's how we got into that was kind of governor's approach at the time.
Yeah. Having gone through that and knowing what the end result was, looking back at the beginnings of that process, what were the criteria that the federal government were using that would have put Maine even on a preliminary list? Was it just the fact that there was a lot of granite in the state?
Yeah, yeah. They were looking at several host rock types to bury this thing below ground, and the key word was disposal. In other words, they wanted to put it below ground and walk away. Yeah. And politically, that wasn't anyway. And so obviously Maine, as well as most of New England, had these granite bodies, granite deposits, and so we were obviously in the candidate. And sure enough, they picked one in New Hampshire and two. And this is just granite. Yeah. Two in Maine. They picked two in Virginia, one in Georgia, two in North Carolina. There was two in Wisconsin. I think they picked 5 in Minnesota. I may have left somebody out there, but that's essentially it. There was quite a few granite bodies that they had identified as being potential deep mine repositories.
Yeah. And what was it about granite that made it the place that, or the sort of material that they want to put one of these disposals in?
Well, it's a rather compact, homogeneous kind of rock, and it's a kind of rock that if you're deep enough into the granite, there's very little water, no little intrusion of water and that sort of thing that would get into a potential cavern that you'd build in it. That's what their thinking was, but that's not necessarily the case. We straightened them out on that.
The issue about the water was because it would interact with the waste and possibly
it had to be dry. It had to be at a certain depth. It was a repository depth, as I remember. It had to be somewhere around 3,000 feet into the host rock, and and that was one of the criteria. It had to be free from any kind of water entrance or contamination or that sort of thing. It had to be free from any seismicity, earthquakes, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so grants kind of fill that role to some extent.
Yeah. Had the federal government approached your office to get information about Maine geology before they ever got to the point of putting Maine on the list?
There was some. We had published a lot of information, and we know that based on our sales, that they had asked for through our publications people that for a number of all of our publications practically, and we kind of sensed that what that was all about.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when they named those potential sites, then they based a lot of it on existing information.
Yeah.
But they didn't have enough.
Yeah. Isn't that always the case? You obviously weren't the only player in that from state government. What were some of the other folks that you were working with from state agencies on that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. We worked with, of course, the Department of Environmental Protection, and worked with them quite a bit. And in the course of our, especially when the sites were announced, there are other agencies, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and that agency, the Attorney General, of course, wanted to be involved in it.
The folks interested in drinking water probably as well.
Oh, yeah. The Department of Human Services, the Drinking Water Program, and the rest, they were all, of course, really on that.
Yeah.
But the water was a big issue,
Yeah.
obviously, in this thing.
So how did that relationship among the various agencies work out? Did you have a pretty coordinated process working with those folks?
Oh, they all got the message. I mean, they were very cooperative.
Yeah. And were they basically, you were leading the process and they were reporting?
Yeah, well,
to
I
you?
was part of the team, and they knew who the team was, and it wasn't just Walter Anderson.
Yeah.
It was the governor's office was really, he wanted to carry out a valid, credible review and analysis of all of this. So, and he did it.
Yeah. Again, knowing what we know about the end result of this process, did you get any sense from talking with the federal folks as this process was going on that they were beginning to understand that perhaps they had not made a particularly wise choice in putting one or both of the sites on the map?
Oh, yes. Well, the thing was, the DOE arranged, there were about 17 states involved in this, and they'd have periodic meetings. We were stakeholders in this. And they had periodic meetings with Governor Brennan's team would attend these meetings. They'd be in Minnesota or Texas or Nevada, the Hannaford site, Savannah River. So we moved all over. We had these periodic meetings, and as we got into it, I mean, they began to realize that they didn't have depending on which state they're in. I mean, the geology isn't one geologic map serves all. It's different situations in each state. And they really hadn't done any really detailed work in any of these states to justify that kind of a institution or program. And so they, as time went on, they began to realize that they needed a lot more information if we were going to buy in any of that. And I would say that the Maine, since Maine came out of the starting blocks with this, with the DOE, that we were able to, in many instances, let's say direct or inform the DOE that if they were going to do this based on their own criteria, they had to do a lot more work. And we were able to specifically do that for them. I'm talking about the science part of this now. And we had them. I mean, we had the knowledge. We had the people. I had a big, rather large staff at the time, experts in geology, and So we were able to review very carefully what they were proposing, and we were able to then, at these meetings, direct them in certain directions. And I must say that Maine was kind of took a leadership role in it, because the other states, I mean, they didn't even have it. I don't think some of them had a geologist on it. They wouldn't know a granite from a shale, some of them. But the thing was, from the science point of view, and since we started so early in the game, but we had kind of a leadership role with these other states. And I recall that myself, Mark Loisel, Nancy would be, the people would be running up to us asking, what about this, what about that, and they were trying to get themselves up to speed. Yeah. And so anyway, and they also had we had so many meetings that it was you had to keep track of what was taking place at each one of these meetings, what the DOE said they'd agree to. And as we got into the program, we found that they weren't living up to some of the things they agreed to, and we reminded them. I mean, we kept a very good record, and Dr. Loisel had a very good memory, and we could catch them. Well, you said this, and so they'd have to backtrack and fill, as it were. So from the science and technical point of view, I mean, we brought them up into a proper way of doing it, but also showing them that they had to do some work before they could determine whether these were suitable sites for.
It sounds like the fact that the decision was made by Maine to be involved in the process where other states were not wanting to talk to the folks at all gave you an advantage, because you had the ability to influence that process.
Yeah, that's right.
And give them information that they might not have already had.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct. And as I said, it also allowed the state of Maine to keep their thumb, or their very close watch on where the DOE was going with this.
Yeah, and what their promises
were. What their promises were, and what they, and they kept, changing the game as time went on, as they probably should. I mean, we were making recommendations, but they had to make, and even at the end, when they announced the site, when they announced the two sites in Maine, the Sebago Granite and the Bottle Lake Pluton in Washington County, we had information. I don't know where they came up with that, because the information we gave them would have clearly shown them scientifically that was not the place to put it.
Yeah.
Never mind politically.
Yeah.
I mean, politics. I mean, but scientifically we had them.
Yeah.
But the political issues were out there, and that's why it was in 1987 the Congress said shut down the program and told the DOE to go to Yucca Mountain. Yeah.
Or hell, whichever.
Yeah.
Was there? I assume that there were the ability to talk with these folks sort of off the record during these meetings. Did you get a different sense from them when they were talking outside the range of any microphones, that they maybe were beginning to understand that maybe they had not gotten the best sense of things in putting those two sites on the list? Or?
Oh, yes. Yes, and I know one of the things I had to appear before TV cameras, and newspapermen were on us all the time, and I testified once before the Senate Committee on I think it was Energy and Natural Resources down in Washington, set up by Olympia Snow, I guess it was, and there I testified about the weaknesses of that program, and why we scientifically said that was not the proper place. Both of those were not the proper place to put that kind of repository.
Did you get a sense that there was some political motivation behind any of these sites being put on the list, or is it all maybe just bad science?
Oh, I'm sure politics was in it. I mean, can't cite any specifically. Maybe Nancy, the governor, may know, or the governor's probably a better handle on it than I did. But you could tell that they were looking at it got to the point where they were kind of getting desperate, and they figured they could maybe intimidate. That's the right word. A state that didn't have the political clout that others did. Obviously, North Carolina has a lot of clout and that sort of thing. And you began to see that they were kind of shifting around, playing a few games. But, I mean, I can't say for sure. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's my sense.
Yeah. Now, there was another aspect of this process besides the scientists working from state government level. There were a lot of involvement from the communities in and around the areas in Maine that had been put on the list.
Yes.
How was your interaction with those folks?
Well, it was, I think, they respected us grudgingly, but there was so many, I don't know how, the demagoguery and the contentious approach that a lot of these special interests activists had, it wasn't any help.
Yeah.
We had to deal with it, but the governor is the one who really had to deal with it. Yeah. And I was amazed at his patience and with these people. And I know we met with him every morning. I'm not everyone, but time to time we met at his. At the Blaine house for breakfast to discuss things. Yeah. He wanted to get our slant and that sort of thing. And so there was a pretty close connection with the Brennan team. And also it was a DOE's role to set up these informational meetings in the communities. Mm-hmm. And that's what they did. And they set it up. And so they were the ones that were, had the informational meetings. I never got on that stage.
Yeah.
That was their
smart
stage.
Decision.
Yes, that was their stage. And even up there, they didn't get it right. I mean, because then when I appear before a newspaper report or something, I mean, I could point out their discrepancies. Let's put it that way.
Obviously, you were talking to the governor and folks in the administration. You were also talking to the media. Did you get invited out to other places to sort of educate people about what was going on beyond just what you would be asked by the media? What kind of situations were those? Were there community leaders that would invite you in?
Community leaders and some legislators would set something up, and they'd want to get the state side of things on this. Yeah. And I recall it with myself, and I believe Nancy was a number of those too, that we could express the state position and what the science was and that sort of thing, as opposed to what the DOE was offering us.
What was the reaction from the community people, selectmen or other folks who might have been involved in these sort of things about working with you? Were they as upset as some of the community groups that wanted to turn this into a major issue, or were they more reasonable listening to what the facts were?
I don't remember much in the way of reason being involved in any of this, and it was very irrational on all sides. I thought I tried to stick to my side, which was the science side, and I think I know we had them. I mean, we had good evidence there, but that's in the end. It was the politics. I mean, they had the other states it wasn't just Maine when Minnesota, Wisconsin, those other states, they all jumped on the Congress. They went after the Congress on it, and that's when the Congress said, "Hey, shut it down," and went to Yucca Mountain.
Yeah. Did you have communication with the geologists or other officials in some of those other states? That
were on the list? State geologists. Yeah.
Were they picking your brain as one of the?
Oh yeah, some of them were behind it because they weren't up front in this thing, so they didn't know what the process was, what the criteria were, but we had all that information up front, so that's why we had kind of a leadership role, because we got in it right at the beginning. Yeah. And so they were playing a little bit of catch up, but they did all right. And we all came to kind of similar conclusions. Yeah. Had different geology, but different kinds of conclusions, and what we expected the DOE to do from the science point of view. And I think they tried to do it, but I sensed that, as I said before, they had a team in Chicago that was running the crystalline rock deep mine repository program. A woman by the name of Dr. Sally Mann was running it, and I think they were trying to do it right, but when it got to headquarters in Washington, things went. What was going on there? What was going on? It didn't seem to jive. That's where I had this sense of maybe something was we're running this thing besides science.
Now, what was the end result of all of this process? We ultimately got off the list. Was it because they came to their senses, or was it because the federal government decided to back away from this particular type of
They
program?
decided to back away from it.
Yeah.
I mean, they had too much political. It was politics
Yeah.
that shut it down. We had them science-wise too, and so I mean, and thanks to Governor Brennan, because he said he wanted good science involved in this, and he meant it, and so we put a lot of resources into that part of it, and so while the politics, I think, ultimately prevailed in the program, but at least as far as Maine concerned, if we had to go up before a court or anything else, comparing our science with theirs, we'd had them.
Yeah. Now, since then, there's obviously been talk about ultimately doing something about nuclear waste. Yucca Mountain was until just recently sort of the primary site that they're looking at, and even that has been backed off on.
Yeah.
What do you see as happening in the area of ultimately dealing with that? And does it look like it's going to be more regionalized or localized than some kind of national repository?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I learned going through this process is that the Department of Energy were looking at a disposal site. That means they wanted to put it in some underground mined repository and walk away from it. As I got into this thing, it seemed to me that the real answer to this, at least in part of the start of the answer, was for a retrievability, or storage retrievable site.
So you leave it there until you figure out what to do with
Yeah,
it.
it's in a place where you can get to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not just put it on the ground and walk away. Where you know where it is, you have it under secure conditions and shielding and the rest, which in Yucca Mountain would have been fine for that.
Yeah.
In the short term, and it's retrievable because there's technology is going along at a fantastic rate now in this thing. And we know so much more now than we did then. And so it's not necessarily, while there is a waste component to it, the new technologies don't have anywhere near the amount of waste generated by the tea kettles we got out there now.
Yeah.
The new plants generate much less, and there's ways of technology now that we can either restore or utilize some of those energy cores to restore them or to use them for other purposes.
We're sort of left now with those nuclear power plants that have either closed or have reached a certain age that they're now becoming sort of localized nuclear waste disposal sites themselves. Do you think the situation we have here in Maine with the facility down at the old Maine Yankee site is a workable alternative to having retrievable storage?
Well, it's kind of a retrievable storage, but to have them scattered all over the country, I don't know. I don't think it's a good idea. I think you need a central place where it's properly cared for and monitored, and in a place where there's not much in the way of seismic activity or volcanic activity, and it's dry, not much for the time being. And I'm sure as time goes on, as the technology advances, that we can ameliorate a lot of the concerns and the hysteria and the misinformation that's out there about nuclear power.
We are looking at a bit of a problem with the change in the world climate, the global warming, the melting of the ice sheets is raising the water levels, and Maine Yankee is only about 30 feet above water level right now.
Yeah. Yes. When those plants were sited all over the world, for that matter, they were back 30, 40, 50 years ago. I mean, citing when Maine Yankee was put in, no one came to the state and asked whether it was a proper site or not. In those days, they could do that.
They wanted it near water because they used
Yeah,
that
yeah,
as a
yeah.
cooling
That's right, cooling.
medium.
Yeah, we're down the one in New Hampshire. The new plant down there is cooling system goes in a tunnel about a couple of miles offshore.
Yeah. And we have several of the nuclear plants in New England are very close to water,
Yes.
including the ones that have been shut down already.
Yes, and those and they're ancient. I mean, they should be shut down and a new class, and it's out there, new class. And again, nuclear power is certainly not polluting from the atmosphere or water point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it still has a bad reputation, I guess.
Yeah.
People don't see it, although they're living with it it's all around them,
Yeah. It's an easy thing to
medicine
forget
and
because it's
everything
not an
else.
issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and but I think, in my opinion, such as it is, the nuclear powers should be on the table
Yeah.
because they can. I mean, we have huge energy demands.
Yeah.
And while I'm all in favor of a mix, an energy mix, to meet that huge energy demand, they're going to have to go to nuclear, I think.
Yeah.
But that's my opinion.
Yeah. There's certainly been a lot of talk about that. Moving on to a totally different subject. I know that you've been involved for a long time with the International Appalachian Trail, which got its start here in Maine, and wonder if you could tell us how that came about and what your involvement with it is.
Well, it started with when I was director of the Maine Geological Survey. My boss, the commissioner, one of Governor Brennan's cabinet people, was named Dick Anderson. Very dynamic person, very innovative, open to ideas, and very supportive of his agency. And it was after Governor Brennan left office, I believe it was in the mid '90s. Governor Brennan thought he would run again for office at that time, and it was Dick Anderson who came up with the idea of promoting this concept of thinking beyond borders. That was the way he put it. And his idea was, why not extend the Appalachian Trail, which supposedly traditionally ends at Mount Katahdin.
Yeah.
Why stop there? Why not extend that trail up through the Maritimes, up into Canadian Maritimes, New Brunswick, and up into Quebec, up into the end of the Gaspé Peninsula, and that's it. See, this is this international connection, think beyond borders, and it had a geologic component to it, because it's still the Appalachians.
That's right.
The Appalachians don't end at Mount Katahdin.
Yeah.
And but anyway, Dick proposed this as one of his platforms, I guess you'd say, for government. He was ready for this International Appalachian Trail. Well, as it turned out, of course, the governor didn't make it at that round, but the idea hung on, and we established a chapter here in Maine. And Dick Anderson was the president of that organization, and we started developing our trail from Mount Katahdin up through Maine, over Mars Hill to Fort Fairfield, where it crossed into the Canadian Maritimes. Well, the word got out. Then the next thing you know, Nova Scotia said, "Hey, we're in the Appalachians." Well, yeah, and so next thing you know, all the Canadian Maritimes jump through Newfoundland and joined up.
Yeah.
Simply because we were able to show that there's a geologic, those mountains still exist. They're all part of the Appalachian Mountain chain, an ancient old mountain chain. And then the next thing you know, we gave presentations at various geologic meetings, And I remember be giving one here in Portland at the Geological Society of America, and there were two people here one was from Scotland and one was from Wales. And I had a little booth there showing the International Appalachian Trail. And they said, hey, what about us? The Caledonides, of Ireland and Wales, Scotland, are part of the Appalachian, the original Appalachian Mountains, and the ancient mountains.
Before the seas separated them.
Yeah, before the seas broke up, and so so the terrains, those geologic terrains, exist in those countries. Well, sure. Next thing you know, there's a chapter in Scotland, and the next thing you know, there's a chapter in Wales, and then Greenland jumps on it. You know, we had a little piece of the Appalachian on the eastern shore of Greenland, and then next thing you know, one domino fell after another until we now have 22 chapters on 3 continents.
Really?
Of the Appalachians, and it all started with Joe Brennan and Dick Anderson, whether they know it or not. And I'm not sure Brennan knows what he's done yet. But we had a delightful meeting in Iceland here, hosted by the U.S. Embassy, and we had the ambassador from Norway and Canada and a few of the whole, rather important people there, and in Iceland, and we gave a presentation there, and they were people from Spain and Portugal, and we just got Morocco. Finally, Morocco got on, and to the Atlas Mountains. The Atlas Mountains are part of the Appalachian.
So you now have a third continent that has
A third continent, and boy, so it just kind of, once it started, because of the geology, they could say, well, the Appalachians don't stop there. The Appalachians, the geologic community picked it up.
Yeah.
And then once the geologists defined where the terrains were, then the recreation and tourism jumped on it.
Yeah.
And here's another thing Governor Brennan did. He was not afraid of using science in the high-level nuclear wasting program. Whether he knew it or not, geology entered his concept of the International Appalachian Trail.
Right.
Because it weren't we had to identify the geologic terrain to justify the fact that that was Appalachian terrain.
My sense is that a lot of the countries that have since joined have a longer tradition of supporting public trails in their countries. Maine and the U.S. have not always been out on the cutting edge. What was the reaction of people in the state of Maine right after that idea was presented? Was there great favor, or was there some resistance?
No, there was. Well, people looked at it rather askance, especially the Appalachian Trail Conference. I mean, their initial reaction was,
no way,
guys,
no how.
These
Over our dead bodies.
Yeah, well, tough. I mean, because the science says the Appalachians don't end at the Mount Katahdin, and but now they've come around.
Yeah.
They attend all our meetings. They have a representative.
Good.
And when we were in Iceland, and we just got back from Plymouth, England, we had another meeting there, and the ATC, the Appalachian Trail Conference, was there. They had a representative there, and they made very favorable comments about the extension of the Appalachian Trail.
Now, what did they see as the reason that all of a sudden they came on board as opposed to resisting it? Was there something that they came to understand that changed their mind?
Maybe it's marketing. I mean, Europeans have a huge hiking society entity, and so does the ATC. I mean, they have a couple of million members, and I think they're pretty close to 100,000 people on that trail. Just this, Dick may have more specifics on that. Yeah. And matter of fact, they've been setting a record of the number of people that are going to make it to Katahdin this year. They said the number I heard was 900, and they're still on the trail.
Really?
And they're working their way into Maine now. And so anyway, there was resistance at first, and they thought we were crazy, quite rough. But the geology, the science was there.
Yeah.
Like the nuclear thing, the science was there. And you could demonstrate it, and we had the geologic community behind us on it. and we had the geologic maps, and many of the folks in the geologic surveys in Ireland, my counterpart in Ireland, and Hugh Barron with the British Geological Survey out of Edinburgh, in Norway, the geologists, were, because just from a geologic point of view, here's a great opportunity for education.
That's right.
But by people who can recreate at the same time, we can demonstrate this ancient landmass and how it was formed and how our state was formed and that sort of thing. And and in Europe they have hundreds of trails, and all they had to do was put a blaze on it, our blaze.
Yep.
It's on that map. All they got to do, I mean, they can pick they can pick their trail, just put the blaze on it, and they're finding out that they have Maine has the folks here in North America are ridge runners. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you go out and you have a tent and your food and everything. You're in a kind of a remote setting.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're in the West Highland Way in Scotland, you're walking up the glens.
Mm-hmm.
You're a glen runner, and you go up to the mountains and back, and then back down to a B&B or a pub. No one carries a tent.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a tent.
Yeah.
But see, they have a different. So this experience is different. They're very much interested in experiencing what we experience on those trails, which is a remote one, and so that's appealing to a lot of them over there. On the other side, people here have there's a heritage, a history, and going through some of these famous places in Europe. Part of the trail goes down the Ruta de la Plata in Spain, which is an old Roman road.
Yeah.
You're walking on an old Roman road. I mean, you get this historic as well as...
Before we understood geology, the people who were making roads often understood the practical effect of the geology.
Yeah. And so, but anyway, it's interesting. I'm sure that Dick will have some more. There's a lot to add to that. But that's what my experience has been from the geologic point of view. And we hold many meetings with the Atlantic Geoscience Society, the Northeast Section of the Geological Society of America, the Institute of American Professional Geologists, and the Geological Society of Maine. We've given papers. I've given papers on this, and published. They've been published, and with PowerPoint presentations, and extolling the virtues of education through the International Appalachian Trail.
Before we move on, I ought to probably make a disclosure. I was formerly a member of the original board of the International Appalachian Trail.
You're one of those guys. Yeah.
Before we get out of all this, are there any other issues you dealt with as state geologist that sort of rise to the level of significance in your mind now that are worth taking note of?
Oh yeah. Well, one of the things, one of the achievements. I mean, the work that we did with the Maine Geological Survey, thanks to the leadership we had at that time, is that we were able to exponentially expand our groundwater and water program, and we had on board hydrogeologists, PhDs, people who were well versed in groundwater hydrology and mapping. So we were able to rapidly put together a mapping program, which is by the way, can be very valuable in the high-level nuclear waste program and the low-level, because we went out and identified groundwater systems, how they worked and that sort of thing, and also the working with water well drillers, we accumulated a vast amount of information on water well drilling and water quality here in the state of Maine, and also our coastal program just expanded at a very rapid rate, because there were so many issues coming up: shoreline erosion, property damage, dredging, the impact of northeasters and storms on our coast, and it set up a whole new some of our legislation having to do with the construction of seawalls and on the coast, based on the information that we were able to put together. We were accumulating that one big database. And another big achievement, I think we're responsible for, and the governor is that we were the first agency to develop what we call a GIS system. We decided we were going to do our screening and our mapping based on geographic information system. In other words, we were able to digitize. We wanted to digitize these maps and all this data so that we can then process it in a way that would accommodate some sort of a screening study, whether it had to do with nuclear waste or landfills or whatever it might be. And that ability was quickly embraced by other agencies, environmental agencies. And I think every agency now has its own GIS system, although we do have a main office of GIS, which began in the Maine Geological Survey.
And the data that you generated in the system of digitizing that has become a very useful tool for folks who are trying to map what will happen with climate change in terms of ocean rise.
It has all kinds of implications in the natural setting here in Maine. Whatever the atmospheric, geologic, oceanic, whatever it might be, and we have done it now in a way that is quickly available.
Yeah.
And all of that happened during the mid-'80s, early mid-'80s is when most of that evolved, and it was the forward thinking. I mean, the people like Dick Anderson and the governor who did appreciate that science, and he let us know too. Yeah. I mean, when he was taking all kinds of heat, I mean, he was taking heat. I mean, some of those meetings I just couldn't. Yeah. But he took it, and amazingly, he handled it with calm, patience, and with sense of humor. He has a sense of humor.
Yes, he does.
and which was very much appreciated because he knew when to put it in when it was necessary to keep everybody on an even keel. And so he was very good at that. But what amazed me, we took off on science during his administration, and because of their support in a wide variety of issues, whether it's coastal or groundwater or whatever it is, he was totally supportive of it.
Yeah, there's a real belief in fact-based science as opposed to opinionated.
Yeah, that's right. He wasn't demagoguery. I'm sure he, as a political person, knows there's a lot of that around, and it still is. Mm-hmm. And sometimes science wins out, and sometimes it doesn't. But it won out with him.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the politics was a big factor. You can't get around that. But he was backed up with some good information. If push came to shove, he had that out there.
Now, when you left state service, what did you move into?
I moved into. I became interested more as a retired person. Of course, I became a board member and chief geologist of the International Appalachian Trail, which I involved in a lot of activity and presentations, both in foreign as well as domestic presentations, and educating people on the trail, the geologic side of it, and then I gave a lot of papers at symposia and that sort of thing on it. I'm a trustee of the Yarmouth Water District. I got elected. It's the first time I run for election. And I was on the board of the Quimby Family Foundation for 4 years, and that was an interesting experience. I'm on the advisory committee of the Maine Mineral Maine Mineral Museum that's now being built up in Bethel. Boy, you should see that place.
Yeah.
And I've been active in a lot of professional organizations. The Geological Society of Maine, I've been involved in that. The American Institute of Professional Geologists, Geological Society of America. I go to all the meetings, and I've participated in on committees and things. And the New England Intercollegiate Geologic Field Conference, We had one up here last spring. I led a trip up through up through east of Baxter on the East Branch, and so I'm pretty busy.
Good.
Busy I want to be. As I want to be.
I know the feeling. I've retired and I'm busy as I ever was.
Yeah.
Are there any questions that I should have asked you that I haven't that you think should have been asked?
You were pretty thorough there. The only thing that let's see, on the present site there are 24 fuel assemblies and 60 casks at Maine Yankee.
Yeah.
Just to harken back to that.
Yeah.
that issue. And again, I don't know, it just doesn't bother me to have that stuff at old sites,
Yeah.
decommissioned sites, just sitting around there.
Yeah.
I'd like to see it.
Easily accessible if somebody.
Yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to,
and it should
do
be in
mischief.
in a retrievable site for a while.
Yeah.
And but that's getting politics now. That's
Yeah.
we can resolve it scientifically, but politically, I don't know.
Yeah. That's right. Well, thank you, Walter. This has been very informative. We appreciate you participating in the process.
Oh, loved it. Absolutely. I mean, I owe that man a lot, because my agency and myself personally, I gained a lot of professional credibility and stature during those days.
I'm pretty sure that the governor would say that if it weren't for people like you,
Yeah.
he would not have done
Yeah.
as well as a governor as he
Well,
did.
maybe so, but there's a lot of But we had a good team. I mean, we had some good people, and Nancy kept us honest on the political side, because sometimes I tend not to pay much attention to the politics, and I step in it.
Is it true that she had a whip and a gun? To
Yeah,
keep you
never got
working?
in a chair, right?
Well, thank you, Walter.
Yeah, sure. Delighted. Thank you.